Hello, Jimmy here, and today I feel ill, which is why instead of a cup of tea, I have a cup of Lemsip, which is medicated goo. And medicated goo, in many forms, comes from plant life. Even in the modern world, lots of our drugs and painkillers are derived from plant matter and plant material that's been touched by a wizard, and then it becomes drugs. And the same is true for lots of things that we use to keep ourselves clean, like hygienic products and soaps and that sort of thing. And recently this has been crossing my various social media feeds, which confused me a little bit, because it's something that I had never come across before. I had never heard of the idea of the Vikings using horse chestnuts as soap. I was aware that horse chestnuts and their leaves could be used to make soap, but we're going to need to dig into this for a minute. So who am I to be talking to about this? I think I should reiterate this because I haven't said it for a while. I am Jimmy. I have a master's degree by research and MRes in archaeological studies. I have a degree in archaeology. I've worked in field archaeology and research archaeology. I have been researching the Viking Age, both affiliated to universities as a researcher and as an independent scholar and hobbyist for 15 years, and this is my job. I do this as my job. I spend a lot of time reading. This bookshelf has lots of very dry, very dull academic type history books that I love, from various university presses. If you go on my Patreon, you'll see some of my books in my bookshelf tour. I think I have to do another bookshelf tour. Guys, if you're a patron, and I promised that, send me a message on Patreon to remind me, because I will get around to it. But yes, that's who I am. Hello! Croeso! Welcome! And if you're new to the channel, I hope that you will stay. Let's crack on. So, the horse chestnut tree is a very common sight. You've probably seen lots of them if you live in any of the major settlements of Europe or North America, frankly. And it is a lovely tree. It's a huge thing. It's a proper forest tree with a big, wide, tall, thick canopy. It's great for keeping the rain off. It has these beautiful sort of palmate leaves with lovely fruit that it bears in the early autumn, the horse chestnut. And horse chestnuts in British and I think Irish English are colloquially known as conkers, the conker tree, Aesculus hippocastanum, the horse chestnut. And conkers are these they're actually beautiful. They look like giant chestnuts. They're sort of like that big. Some of them can get to like quite gobstoppery sized, and they're normally like an inch and a half, 2 inches wide when they're fully grown. They've got this lovely lustrous brown colour with like a pale whorl on the top, and they do look like giant chestnuts. Do not eat them. They are bad for you. They are toxic. If you eat horse chestnuts, they will make you poorly. But they have a number of uses. They're used traditionally to keep away spiders. Some people say that they keep away clothes moths, though that's debatable. And the nuts themselves and the leaves are used to make soap. They create saponin. Saponin is a chemical compound. Saponins are chemical compounds that act as surfactants. They are biosurfactants. And surfactant is a portmanteau word of surface action agent. Surface action agents. Surfactants. And a surfactant basically reduces surface tension. So if you use this saponin, or if you mix it with water and you like cook it up and it produces a lovely soapy substance, you can use that to reduce the surface tension between a liquid and a solid. That is very useful if you need to clean grime off things. You can use this surfactant to reduce the surface tension to make it easier for you to wipe the grime off or to rinse the grime off. And they are not the same as the sweet chestnut. Definitely not the same as the sweet chestnut. Here is the leaf of the sweet chestnut tree. Here is a leaf of the horse chestnut tree. Here is the fruit, the nut of the sweet chestnut, here is the nut of the horse chestnut. Conkers, very, very different, very good for playing conkers with. Conkers, you might have heard conkers. Conkers is a traditional sport played by school kids in the UK and Ireland, where you take a horse chestnut, you take a conker, you drill a hole in it, you put a string through it and knot the string at the end, and then you whack your opponent's conker with your conker, and if it shatters, then you win. If yours breaks, then you lose. There's an international conker championship competition held in England every year, which has just happened, and my friend Malcolm, fellow Viking reenactor, attended and didn't get through to the finals, but put in a splendid effort. Well done, Malcolm. But I digress. So conkers are amazing. Conker tree is fantastic. They have beautiful flowers on them. They're really attractive. They're very, very popular as decorative trees in parks and parkland and in major gardens in big houses and cities and that kind of thing. But they are not native to many of the places where they are found. They are not native to North America. They are not native to Great Britain. They're not native to Ireland. Their nativity, their native range, is very, very limited. Originally, these things were native to the Balkan Peninsula. This is the Balkan Peninsula, and it's interesting to think that the Vikings were using these things for soap, because as far as I'm aware, and as far as the arboricultural world is aware, these things didn't get to Northern Europe until about 400 years ago. So where does all of this come from? We're going to dig into that in a sec, but first we're going to dig a little bit into the history of this tree spreading. So the earliest European mentions that I've found of the horse chestnut tree come from a man with the most amazing name I've ever heard, which is Willem Quackenbeen. And Willem Quackenbeen was he was the personal physician of the Holy Roman Emperor in the late 16th century. Was it Ferdinand? Was it a Ferdinand? Was it Ferdy II? Anyway, editing Jimmy will put it on screen. And in the late 16th century, he trundled over to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul in modern Turkey. At the time, obviously, it was the capital of the Ottoman Empire. He went to meet with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And whilst he was in Istanbul, Willem sees all of these amazing new-looking trees. And they're big, and they're beautiful, and they're green, and they've got the most fantastic giant chestnuts for fruit, with big spiky shells. And he discovers that they are used for treating digestive problems, coughs, and chest infections in horses, and that they are known to people in Istanbul as horse chestnuts for that reason. He starts writing letters to some of his friends in Italy, and he starts sending samples of some of these seeds and some of the leaves and branches even of these trees to friends in various places. He also notes in his letters that they're not native to the region. They're not native to Istanbul, but nobody seems to be able to tell him where the heck these trees come from. Turns out they're from the Balkan Peninsula, as we know. But the first of these horse chestnuts to arrive in Britain gets there in 1616, after they've already started getting into places like Prague. They're starting to be used in Italy because of Willem's help, and after 1616 they start to proliferate. They become very, very popular. In the 18th century they start getting planted in these new planned gardens of big houses by people like Capability Brown in the UK. In the 19th century they become very popular for the big parks that you start see being built in cities, these new municipal parks. They're even popular in graveyards and places like that as well. And now they're just bloody everywhere. There's one around the back of my flat that looks really nice. It's a bit late for me to be filming them for the fruit dropping, which is sad, but here's a nice horse chestnut tree next to St. Cuthbert's Church. A little horse chestnut tree next to a medieval church, probably planted there in the 19th century, and it looks great. They've got these beautiful leaves that you can just about appreciate, even though they're starting to go a bit brown. Oh, sorry I sound so sinusy. It's all around here right now. It's all around here. It's all of my sinuses, my eustachian tubes. It's, oh man, it's just one of those lingering colds, you know? It's grim. Anyway, conkers. But, as you can see, if I type in #Viking soap in my Instagram search box, this starts to turn up. they start to be posts with people cramming conkers and chopping them and quartering them and soaking them in water and saying, did you know the Vikings used these to make soap? And this isn't just a suggestion. This isn't, it is possible, or we believe, or some people say. It is a definitive statement of fact. The Vikings used these to make soap. And I had no idea where this claim comes from, because if we look at what we've just been talking about, the Vikings probably didn't even have access to horse chestnut trees. And if this type of tree didn't arrive in Northern Europe until the 17th century, how the hell were the Vikings famous for using these foreign exotic fruits that they didn't have access to? And I know what you might be thinking. You might already be thinking, and I can hear the cogs in your minds turning and saying, what if they were being used in Constantinople by Varangian guards? The Varangian guards were mercenaries, effectively, working and fighting for the emperor, and they tended to be from northern European groups. They tended to be from groups from further north than Byzantium, anyway. So they were Kievan Rus, they were Anglo-Saxons, there were Danes and Norwegians and Swedes who were Varangioi. But we don't have any mentions from the Viking Age of horse chestnuts in the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, because it didn't exist. In the Byzantine Empire, we do not have any evidence for that. The Ottoman Empire of the 16th century and the Byzantine Empire of the 10th and 11th centuries are very different beasts. They are very different. They are significantly different civilizations and cultures. So we have no reason to think that the Byzantine emperor had a load of horse chestnut trees planted in Byzantium, in Constantinople, 500 years before Willem Quakenbane and the Holy Roman Empire visited the Sultan in the 1500s. There is no evidence for that. There's no reason for us to even think that, as far as I'm aware. If you have a source for that, by all means share it with the class. But the Vikings did use soap. We know that soap was available. Soap has been available for 5,000 years. This is a wax tablet written 5,000 years ago with a recipe for soap on it. And there are two main ingredients for this soap, and I would like you to guess what they are. If you guessed tallow and plant ashes, you were correct. For the vast majority of our time using soap, for the last 5,000 years, soap has been made from animal fat or some form of fat and ashes. A huge amount of forest in Europe has been lost so that plant material could be burnt, turned into ash, and then used for the production of soap. Because the tallow acts alongside the lye, Lye, of the plant ashes that are soaked in water to create, effectively, a surfactant that allows you to degrease cloth. And most of the time that this soap has been made, throughout our time as human beings, it's been made for cloth production. Because when you have woolen cloth, it has lots of lanolin in it from the sheep. Sheep have lanolin in their wool, makes it greasy, makes it waterproof. It's really nice stuff, actually. If you have wool that smells like sheep, it's probably got a fair bit of lanolin still in it. If you want to get rid of that lanolin and make it less greasy, make it easier to work with, to do things like tapestry or making it into superfine yarn or weaving with it in a special way, you wash the fleece. So if you wanted to wash sheep fleece in the pre-industrial era, you basically were going to be using animal fat mixed with ashes. Lots of people made this as a cottage industry. People bought this in. It became a huge industry in the 17th century in Europe. But we already know that by the 9th century, we have Carolingian documents that describe the tools and requirements for quote-unquote women's work, which includes fleeces and soap. Soap is included as something that is used for women's work. And when they say women's work, they're talking about textile production, tapestry, weaving, and so forth. Okay? The soap workers of the Carolingian Empire are piled in with people who work with fat and tallow and wax. Right? Fat workers, effectively. Beeswax is like a fatty substance, if you think about it texturally, right? So, soap is being made in the Viking Age, at the start of the Viking Age, we know soap is being made in Northern Europe. We know soap is being used in Northern Europe for textile production. So how does the jump happen from tallow and wood ash soap being used for textile production and the Vikings making soap out of conkers? And it took me a little while to figure this out, but it's Horrible History's fault. So Horrible Histories is amazing. I will not have a word said against Horrible Histories. They are one of the major reasons I started studying history in the first place. The books are fantastic. I have every single one of them in my collection, and Terry Deary is a wonderful writer. He is an engaging writer, he is a fantastic personality, he's a great performer. He's not an historian. He is, by his own admission, he is not a history student, he is not a researcher of history. He doesn't research the history for the Horrible Histories books, and I know that because I went to a talk with him and had a chat with him afterwards, and he said that he doesn't do the research, and that's fine. But on page 85 of Vicious Vikings, we have a recipe to make your own Viking soap with conkers, the nuts from Aesculus hippocastanum, which is not native to Northern Europe, which wouldn't have been available to the Vikings at the time, as far as we're aware. Do we have any evidence for Vikings going to the Balkan Peninsula and buying basket loads of conkers to turn into soap, or to plant their own conker trees? No, and in fact conker trees aren't that common even today in the parks of Scandinavia. They're just not as common there as they are in other parts of Europe. So the Vikings are probably the least likely of all the European peoples to have developed this conker soap tradition. Anybody else closer to the Balkans and Greece probably would have developed it sooner, and did. We know that the Italians were doing it in the 17th century. Now, as I'm sure you all know, Horrible Histories are some of the most popular children's history books in history. They're fantastically popular, the TV series are amazing. It's not surprising, therefore, that probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of kids have tried this recipe and then just carried on having that in their heads as, hey, you know what we used to do as a kid? I used to make Viking soap. You know what Viking soap is? It's conkers and water. Well, probably not. Viking soap was probably animal fat mixed with wood ash, just like Roman soap, just like ancient Greek soap, just like Carolingian soap, just like Anglo-Saxon and French and Holy Roman and Frisian soap was fat and ash, because that is what soap has been made from right up until the 20th century. But it sure as heck isn't the stuff that they were washing their hands with. Now, if you use this soap for long enough, you will obviously notice that you don't have grease on your hands anymore, which is great. But the problem with tallow and lye soap is it is vicious stuff if you get the mixtures wrong. If you get the recipe slightly wrong, it can cause lots of problems. If you have eczematic issues on your hands, I do not recommend using this stuff. Over the last few hundred years, lots of people have tried to improve tallow soap by using olive oil instead of tallow, by trying different things instead of the lye that they were using to make it less injurious to your hands. So this is a real problem. It's such a problem that people dedicated their lives to trying to fix it in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, and eventually they found ways to make much, much gentler soaps, not just to stop hurting hands, but so that people could wash their fine laces and linens in them. This is mostly still about textile production in the 17th and 18th centuries. It's about washing your lacy collars, right? Without degrading the fibre, because you're using lye soap mixed with fat. In the Viking Age, there's no evidence whatsoever that the Old Norse were using soap to wash their hair and hands with. Now, if they wanted to degrease their hair, they could use tallow and lye soap. But why would you want to do that? You comb your hair every day as an Old Norse person, so it's already clean. You're combing the nits out of it. We also know that nits prefer non-greasy hair. So washing all the natural oils out of your hair isn't something that we have any evidence for the Vikings doing, and some of the combs we have suggest that they did have natural oils and grease in their hair because they come out into the combs. We don't know that they were scrupulously clean. There's loads of stuff on the internet like this, like the Vikings were obsessed with hygiene. The Vikings weren't obsessed with hygiene. They had one bath a week and they combed their hair. That's not obsessed with hygiene. That is the most baseline. Keeping yourself clean enough to function and not be riddled with stink and disease. Bear in mind, they didn't have germ theory, so they weren't washing their hands before every meal. They weren't washing their hands after handling stuff that could kill them, substances that could cause you to die. They just weren't, because they didn't need to. If your hands aren't covered in crap, you don't need to wash your hands. Unless you're purifying yourself for a religious ceremony, you are clean enough to eat with. You are clean enough to shake hands with people with. You are clean enough to, like, touch someone's face and butt, right? Like, they were not obsessed with hygiene in the way that people seem to think they were. They had a bath once a week. And that's according to John de Wallingford, who was from the 13th century. He was using earlier sources, but, like, that's what we've got. Full disclosure, my memory card got super full, so I had to just go and empty everything off my memory card, and then I had to go and take my car to the garage. So, if the exposure here looks like it's filmed a couple of hours later, that's probably because it was. But that's what we've got. We've got John de Wallingford, a couple of hundred years after the Viking Age, saying that they smelt nice. He was working from earlier sources, but if a bath once a week, probably most of the time in cold water as well, because it takes a lot to heat water up, it takes a lot of energy, is your idea of pristine clean. Bearing in mind, we've had people claiming that they were using this tallow and lye soap to wash their hair with, which is not a great idea, because if it gets in your eyes and it's not been properly mixed, it can be pretty unpleasant. It can be quite caustic. Lye is caustic soda. Doing that just with cold water just doesn't sound great. Like, no wonder you have to comb your hair if that's what you're washing your hair with, which they probably weren't. But that's what we've got. I don't know where Horrible Histories got their source from that says that they used conkers. In fact, I'm pretty sure they didn't have a source, and they just went with using conkers because it's an easy, fairly kid-friendly, abundantly available source of saponin. It gets really soapy really fast, really easily. You can literally take a leaf from a horse chestnut tree, scrunch it up in your hands, dip it in water, and you will get this greenish soapy stuff off it. That's the saponin, and it'll be soapy, and it smells of clean, basically. It smells of clean. But that's pretty much it. I don't know where this came from. Did the Vikings use conkers to make soap? Almost certainly not. Like I say, the earliest source we have for the horse chestnut coming further north in Europe than the Balkans is from the 16th century, and the earliest they arrived in the British Isles was the 17th century, and we've got fewer of them in Scandinavia now than in the rest of Europe and North America. So it seems highly unlikely. Is it possible that a Varangian guardsman bought a load of conkers and brought them back to Norway? Yes. Is it likely? No, because they were too busy fighting and earning money and drinking. But this is how things start. You read it in a children's book, and Horrible History is a kid's book, and then you remember that into your adult life, and then you put it on the internet, and then your post goes viral, and 1 million people suddenly use the hashtag Viking soap, and this becomes part of the accepted narrative of history, and then it starts going into history books, and people start getting taught it in school, and this is how falsehoods get into our history, and get into our collective memory. So on the face of it, it's not very important that people say the Vikings used conkers to make soap, but when we dig into it, and we see where that goes, you can see how that can snowball. It's like people saying that the Vikings ate blueberries, and the Vikings ate blaberry, like the word for a whortleberry or a bilberry, which is vaccinum. I want to say it's vaccinum myrtalis or myrtilis. I think it's vaccinum myrtilis. Is blåbär, blueberry. In Scotland, they call them blaeberries because they're blue and they're berries, and they taste a lot and they look a lot like blueberries. But blueberry that you buy in the US and in Canada and in the UK, which is an imported North American blueberry, is Vaccinum angustifolium, which is a different species of the genus Vaccinum, related, but different fruit. But people say, oh yeah, the Vikings ate blueberries. Well, the Vikings, if we're speaking in English, ate bilberries, not blueberries, which is slightly different, but different enough that they've got two different species names. They're literally eating a different species. Nitpicking, perhaps. A tangent, perhaps. But this is why I'm here. I'm here to debunk things and to teach you stuff you might not have known. Like, conkers didn't arrive in Northern Europe until the 17th century, so no, the Vikings were probably not making soap out of it. The Vikings were probably making soap the way people in Europe had been making soap for 1,000+ years already, by combining rendered animal fat, tallow, and lye, soaked plant ashes, combining them to make tallow soap, which was in use until the 20th century, widespread use until the 20th century, all over the world. That's probably what they were using. They didn't have germ theory, so they didn't need to wash their hands, so they didn't wash their hands. The number of parasites that we found in their poop and in their skeletons tells us that they weren't the most hygienic people in the world. They were more hygienic than some of their contemporaries because they had a bath once a week. But to say stuff like they were obsessed with hygiene is hyperbole beyond reason. Stop it. You're making that up. You're just making it up. Ugh. Okay. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, thank you to all of my wonderful patrons. Obviously, if you want to support the channel financially, we have the Patreon link in the description, we have the Ko-fi link. If you just want to support the channel, please do like the video, subscribe the video, share it amongst your friends and reenactment groups. We'd love to get the channel up to 100,000. We're creeping up on 100k, which is really exciting and really cool. Yes, diolch yn fawr iawn am wylio. Thank you very much indeed for watching. And if you're watching this the month it goes out, you're watching it in the Welsh month of Hydref, which is also the Welsh word for autumn. And I recently learned that Hydref apparently comes from the Welsh for the braying of the stag. Hydref, 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 which I think is really cool. It's also known as Mis y Gwyn, the month of wine, or Mis y Mel, the month of honey, which is lovely stuff. Really, really cool. I learnt that from Sketchy Welsh. There's a lovely chap doing great work in helping people learn Welsh, so pop that in the description as well. But diolch yn fawr unwaith eto am wylio. Thank you very much once again for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed, and I hope that this has been fun. Till the next time, tan y tro nesa, as ever, hwyl am y tro. Bye bye for now.